They appeared out of nowhere, like silver ghosts cutting through the German sky. Our best aces, veterans of hundreds of missions, trembled at the sight of those distant silhouettes. These were the words of Oberst Johannes Steinhoff, one of the most experienced Luftwaffe pilots, describing the first encounter with P-51 Mustangs over Berlin in March 1944. What should have been another routine day of intercepting Allied bombers became the moment when German pilots realized that the rules of aerial warfare had fundamentally changed. The sound of Merlin engines echoing through the stratosphere at 30,000 feet announced not just the arrival of a new fighter, but the beginning of the end of German air superiority. For months, Luftwaffe pilots had grown accustomed to the predictable pattern. Allied bombers would penetrate German airspace with short-range escort fighters that would eventually turn back, leaving the heavy bombers vulnerable to concentrated attacks. But on that crisp March morning, something was terrifyingly different. The escort fighters weren't turning back. They were staying, following the bombers all the way to the heart of the Reich, transforming what had been a calculated risk into an impossible mission. The genesis of this transformation lay not in American ingenuity, but in British desperation and a stroke of engineering brilliance that would reshape the entire conflict. In 1940, as the Battle of Britain raged overhead, the Royal Air Force faced a critical shortage of fighter aircraft. North American Aviation, a relatively small company in California, received an urgent request from the British Purchasing Commission to produce P-40 Warhawks under license. Instead, company president James Dutch Kindleberger made a bold counteroffer. "Give us 120 days, and we'll design you a fighter that's better than anything currently flying." The British, desperate for any aircraft that could match the Messerschmitt Bf 109, agreed to this audacious proposal. What emerged from North American's Inglewood factory was the NA-73X, later designated the P-51 Mustang. However, the early versions powered by the Allison V1710 engine were disappointing at high altitudes, relegated to low-level reconnaissance and ground attack missions. The aircraft's sleek lines and innovative laminar flow wing design promised exceptional performance, but the Allison engine's single-stage supercharger limited its effectiveness above 15,000 feet. British test pilots, while impressed with the Mustang's handling characteristics and range, noted its critical weakness: superb below 15,000 feet, but becomes a sitting duck at the altitudes where the real war is being fought. The transformation that would terrorize German pilots began in a Rolls-Royce facility in Derby, England, where engineers were experimenting with a radical idea. What if they replaced the Mustang's Allison engine with their own Merlin 61, the same power plant that had made the Spitfire legendary? The marriage of American aerodynamic innovation with British engine technology created something unprecedented in aviation history. The Merlin's two-stage, two-speed supercharger transformed the P-51 from a low-altitude performer into a high-altitude predator capable of maintaining full power at 30,000 feet. Test flights in October 1942 revealed performance figures that seemed almost impossible: a top speed of 441 mph at 25,000 feet, a service ceiling of 42,000 feet, and most crucially, an internal fuel capacity that provided a combat radius of over 1,000 miles. Major Thomas Hitchcock, the American military attaché in London, who witnessed these tests, immediately cabled Washington. "The Mustang with the Merlin engine is not just an improvement, it's a revolution. This aircraft can escort our bombers anywhere in Europe and outfight anything the Germans can put in the air." The implications were staggering. For the first time in the war, Allied bombers could have fighter protection throughout their entire mission, from takeoff in England to targets deep in the heart of Germany and back. The strategic impact became devastatingly clear during the Big Week operations of February 1944, when the newly formed 8th Air Force fighter groups, equipped with P-51D Mustangs, began their systematic destruction of the Luftwaffe. German pilots, who had developed sophisticated tactics for dealing with short-range escorts, found themselves facing an entirely new reality. Hauptmann Heinz Knoke, a veteran Luftwaffe pilot with over 400 combat missions, described the psychological impact in his diary. "The Americans have changed everything. Before, we knew that after a certain point we would face only the bombers. Now, these silver devils follow them everywhere, and they're faster than our 109s, more maneuverable than our 190s, and they never seem to run out of fuel." The numbers tell the story of this transformation with brutal clarity. In January 1944, Before the widespread deployment of the P-51, the 8th Air Force lost 206 bombers in a single month. By April 1944, with Mustang groups providing escort, bomber losses had dropped to 89 aircraft despite flying deeper into German territory and attacking more heavily defended targets. The Luftwaffe, which had been losing approximately 12% of its fighter force monthly due to combat and accidents, saw this figure spike to over 25%, as German pilots found themselves outmatched, not just in numbers, but in performance and tactical flexibility. The human cost of this technological revolution became apparent in the testimonies of German pilots who survived the war. Oberleutnant Franz Steigler, who would later become famous for his encounter with the damaged B-17 Ye Old Pub, described the psychological transformation. "We went from hunters to hunted in a matter of months. The Mustang pilots were aggressive, well-trained, and they had the luxury of choosing when and where to fight. We were forced to engage under their terms, at their altitude, with their fuel advantage." The P-51's impact extended beyond mere performance statistics. Its presence fundamentally altered German defensive strategy, forcing the Luftwaffe to abandon effective concentrated attacks on bomber formations in favor of desperate hit-and-run tactics. German pilots reported that Mustang formations would often split up, with some aircraft staying high to protect the bombers while others dove down to engage German interceptors, preventing the coordinated attacks that had been so effective against unescorted bombers. Major Georg Peter Eder, one of Germany's highest-scoring fighter aces, noted the tactical shift. "Against the Thunderbolts and Lightnings, we could still use our altitude advantage and superior climb rate. Against the Mustang, we had no advantages left. It could outclimb us, outrun us, and outlast us. Fighting a P-51 was like fighting a superior version of ourselves." The final phase of the Mustang's dominance came during the spring of 1944, when Allied fighter groups began implementing fighter sweeps, offensive operations designed specifically to seek out and destroy German fighters before they could threaten bomber formations. These missions, led primarily by P-51 groups, penetrated deep into German airspace, attacking Luftwaffe bases, training facilities, and aircraft factories. The psychological impact on German pilots was devastating. Lieutenant Günther Rall, who would end the war as the third highest scoring ace in history, described the hopelessness of the situation. "By mid-1944, we were no longer fighting to win air superiority. We were fighting simply to survive each mission. The Mustangs were everywhere, and they seemed to know our every move before we made it. The statistical evidence of the P-51's impact is overwhelming." Between January and June 1944, Mustang-equipped fighter groups were credited with destroying over 4,950 German aircraft in aerial combat, while losing only 2,520 of their own, a kill ratio of nearly 2.1 against experienced German pilots flying from their own territory. More importantly, the presence of long-range escort allowed the combined bomber offensive to achieve its strategic objectives, crippling German war production and forcing the Luftwaffe to expend its remaining experienced pilots in increasingly desperate defensive actions. The legacy of the P-51 Mustang extends far beyond its impressive combat record, fundamentally reshaping military aviation doctrine and establishing principles that continue to govern modern air power. The aircraft proved that technological innovation, when properly applied, could overcome numerical disadvantages and change the entire character of a conflict. Its success demonstrated the critical importance of long-range escort capability, a lesson that would influence fighter design for decades to come. The Mustang's impact on World War II was so profound that German General Adolf Galland, commander of the Luftwaffe fighter force, later stated, "The appearance of the Mustang over Berlin was the beginning of the end for the German Air Force. We had lost the war in the air. The P-51's combination of range, performance, and reliability became the template for post-war fighter development, influencing everything from the F-86 Sabre to modern multi-role fighters." Perhaps most significantly, the Mustang's success established the principle that air superiority is not just about having the best individual aircraft, but about having the right aircraft for the specific mission requirements. The German pilot's nightmare became aviation history's greatest success story, proving that in warfare, as in technology, adaptation and innovation often matter more than initial advantages. The silver ghosts that haunted German skies in 1944 had not only changed the course of World War II, but had established principles that still govern modern air power today. The importance of long-range escort, the supremacy of quality over quantity when combined with adequate numbers, and the need for integration between different types of aircraft to maximize operational effectiveness. The German pilot's nightmare became the model for all future air superiority operations, proving that in modern warfare, controlling the skies means controlling the destiny of nations.